Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of thy faithful, and enkindle in them the fire of thy love. Send forth thy Spirit, and they shall be created.
And thou shalt renew the face of the earth.
Let us pray. O God, who didst instruct the hearts of thy faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant us in that same Spirit to be truly wise and ever to rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, today, the title of this class is Athanasius Contra Mundum, or Athanasius Against the World. Another title might be Bishops Behaving Badly. We're going to see a lot of that. If you recall, in the introductory class, we talked about major themes that we're going to talk about in this class. The fifth major theme was that the church crisis is normal. The church is almost always in crisis, and especially so after a council. That's a council. That's normal condition for the church, and we're going to see that. Nowadays, we had the Second Vatican Council 40 years ago, and a lot of people think that either that caused or went along with various crises that continues in the church today. And that people are distressed about that. Something needs to be done about it. That's Catholics of all persuasions think something that needs to be done and the church is in a crisis. Well, it's nothing compared to what we had back in the 300s. You had the Council of Nicaea, which is the first great ecumenical council. In many ways, it's one of the most famous councils ever, one of the most important councils ever. And it condemned Arianism. 300 bishops condemned Arianism, made it clear Arius was exiled, and the only two bishops who didn't go along with it, they were exiled. And the issue was settled. And it was closed, and it was a great success. Everybody had a banquet and went home congratulating each other. It was a wonderful thing that happened. The Catholic truth had been preserved. Well, within just a couple of years, the wheels fell off of that, and pretty soon the Arians came back stronger than ever, and it looked like the entire Catholic religion was going to go down in flames as a result of just in the aftermath of this council. And the next 60 years or so are filled with this crisis, and it's a crisis that almost killed the church, and we're going to talk about that today. Over here on the right, I've got anti-Catholic councils. People think there's ecumenical council. The first one was in 325, and then the second one was 381, and Constantinople, the third was in Ephesus at 431, and the Council of Chalcedon in 451. Those are the four ecumenical councils, the first four. And people think, well, those are the councils they had. What you don't realize is they had councils almost every year, and most of them were heretical, and hundreds of bishops voted for heresies in these councils. People don't realize that, but that's the truth if you read history, and you'll see this if we go through this today. One of the first, what happened is the Emperor Constantine I, he converts to Christianity, calls the council to sort of to impose peace on the church. There's a turmoil, and he wants it solved so the bishops get together and they solve the turmoil, everybody thinks. Well, Constantine, though, starts having second thoughts about this because, among other things, he's in Nicomedia, the imperial capital in the east, and Eusebius of Nicomedia was one of the bishops who got exiled. He's a friend of the Arian position. He's sympathetic to it, and he and his followers start talking to the emperor and getting messages to the emperor. And Constantine has second thoughts and recalls Eusebius of Nicomedia, and ultimately makes him the Patriarch Bishop of Constantinople, his new city that he founds, the new Rome. So this bishop, who had been on the Arian side, suddenly finds himself in one of the most powerful positions in the empire. He has the ear of the emperor. And the emperor, as we see about when we talk about the difference between Arianism and Catholicism, we can see that Arianism is much more congenial to the position of the emperor. It makes the emperor much more important in church affairs. And so the emperors in the imperial court and the court officials like Arianism. It's a good thing for them. It gives them power over these bishops and the ability to actually impose religion upon people. And another thing, and I'm not sure I've emphasized enough, the army loved Arianism. The army, all the generals and almost all the troops were staunch Arians. The army held itself apart. And the Roman state really was a military state. They were always involved in fights on the frontiers and in fights trying to keep the emperor in office. And if you joined the army, it was a lifetime commitment. You'd be in there 20 years and then you'd retire and you'd still be always army. And they viewed themselves as separate and different from the populace, and they kind of looked down upon the populace. And they had this kind of club, and there may be, 500,000, 1 million people in the army, and Arianism was very congenial to them too. So the very powerful things in the state were all tended to be sympathetic to Arianism. And the Arian politicals, the bishops, like Eusebius, the political Arians, all played on this. And there was a mutual support society. The imperial officials and the political bishops and the army all get together and say, Arianism is not so bad. And these Catholic people are troublesome. First of all, they're not like us. They're not in the army, the people we used to kill and persecute. And they're out there. A lot of them are in the desert. They don't dress right. They're not the rich people. They're not the cream of society. They're kind of the dregs. And they're very troublesome because they keep asserting things like, the emperor, has to obey the church. And the emperor's subject to us because we control religion. So they were very much anti-Catholic. They were disposed to be anti-Catholic. So this is what happened. And the way the politicals attacked the Nicene bishops, the Catholic bishops, is they started asserting things about them. They started making accusations against them, and the emperor would depose the bishops. One of the first things that happened is the bishop of Antioch, one of the most important cities in the world. The Arian party accused him of various misdeeds, and so the emperor removed him, deposed him, sent him into exile where he died, and inserted an imperial appointee as the bishop of Antioch. Well, the people revolted, they didn't like this, and a schism resulted in Antioch. And that lasted for the next 60 years. And after a while, there were 3 or 4 rival claimants to be bishop of Antioch. This had significance, widespread significance. What it meant was that Antioch in its bishopric, which was the 3rd most important bishopric in the world, was absent from this battle because it was a complete schism and a complete breakdown of order. So you don't see Antioch playing the role that it normally would have played because of this schism. Another bishop that they went after was Marcellus of Ancyra, a very fervent supporter of Nicaea and the Homoousian consubstantiality. He was deposed. The accusations were made against him. They called him a Sabellian, the opposite heresy. And so the emperor deposed him and put in a pro-Arian bishop there. And then they turned their sights on Athanasius. And to tell you about how Saint Athanasius, in 328, if you recall at Nicaea, the bishop of Alexandria was a man named Alexander of Alexandria. And he had his young deacon with him, Athanasius, who played a key role in the Council of Nicaea in 325. Well, in 328, Alexander of Alexandria died, and the Egyptian church elected Athanasius bishop. He's about 30 years old. Very young bishop. So Athanasius becomes bishop, and he is the champion of the Nicene Catholic view. And I'll read to you what happened. I'm reading out of Father Leo Davis's history of the 7 ecumenical councils. And this is what he says. And I think you'll find some of this pretty interesting. After he talks about how the Bishop of Antioch was deposed, and Marcellus of Ancyra was deposed by the emperor, and Arians put in their place, it says, finally it was the turn of Athanasius, who in 328 had embarked upon his troubled 45-year episcopate at Alexandria. He was accused, among many charges, of immoral conduct, illegally taxing the Egyptians, supporting rebels against the throne, tyrannizing dissident bishops, breaking the chalice of a rebellious priest, and murdering a bishop, keeping the bishop's severed hand for magical rites. Athanasius successfully refuted the charges, even bringing the man supposedly murdered into the courtroom and dramatically revealing his intact 2 hands. But he was again called to stand charges in 335 before the Synod of Tyre. Stacked with his enemies, fresh from the dedication of Constantine's great new church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, Athanasius was condemned by the Synod, but fled to the newly founded Constantinople, where he confronted the emperor unexpectedly on a road leading into the city. Athanasius stands by the road, waiting for the emperor to come by. And he obtained exoneration in a personal interview with the emperor. Still, his enemies persisted in accusing him before the emperor of interfering with the grain supply from Egypt to the growing new capital. Since Constantinople was dependent upon export through Alexandria of 80,000 bushels of grain a day that it was soon to need, Constantine could brook no tampering with the food supply by an Egyptian bishop. The emperor exiled Athanasius in 336, his first exile, to Trier in Rhineland, Germany. The reaction in Alexandria was tumultuous. Even the great hermit Anthony, reputed founder of monasticism, wrote a protest to the emperor. But since the three leaders of the Nicene party, including Antioch and Sarah and now Alexandria, since the three leaders of the Nicene party were now out of action, Arius himself was to be rehabilitated. Because Alexandria was still too hot to hold Arius, he went to Constantinople for his formal readmission to the church. However, on the day before the ceremony in 336, Arius suffered an intestinal hemorrhage in a public bathroom and was found dead. In 337, the first Christian emperor, Constantine himself, passed from the scene. After putting aside the imperial purple, he was clothed in the white garment of the newborn Christian and baptized by Eusebius of Nicomedia before his death. And so we have this great change with the death of Constantine. He gets baptized by the Arian sympathizer Eusebius of Nicomedia in the capital, and Athanasius is into exile. And we see that the Arians are all coming back in force and taking over. The emperor and the state is opposing the world. I'll read another excerpt about what happened when Constantine died. And this too is not well known generally. Upon Constantine the Great's death in 337, there occurred an act of violence more befitting the Turkish seraglio than a Christian court. With at least the knowledge of Constantius, the only son in Constantinople at the time, Constantine the Great's 2 half-brothers and 6 young princes of the blood were massacred by the army. Only 2 young cousins survived, Gallus and the future Emperor Julian. This has become normal in the Eastern Roman Empire. It's a change in regime. If you're a family member, the likelihood that you're going to be murdered goes way up. And this is going to persist for 1,000 years. You see it over and over and over. With this bloodletting, the will of Constantine was set aside, but the unity of the Constantinian dynasty was secured. His 3 sons parceled out the empire among themselves. Constantine II, age 21, received Gaul, Britain, and Spain. Constantius II, age 20, got Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. Constans, age 14, got Italy, Africa, and the Danubian provinces. Would that we could get jobs for our children so easily. Here, you have Africa and the Danube. And at the age of 14, this is a little scary. 3 years later, war broke out between Constantine II and Constans. Constans managed to defeat and execute his older brother and occupy his provinces. As a result, Constans ruled the west, Constantius the east from 340 on. The significance of this is that Constantius was very much pro-Arian. And he's Constantius II because Constantine's father was also named Constantius. And he was the Eastern Emperor. Constans in the West was more accommodating to the Catholic Nicene point of view, but most of the important bishops in the world were in the East, other than the Bishop of Rome, and Constantius continued to exercise his pro-Arian policies for those folks. Athanasius is in exile, Constantius is in the east, and they're continuing to depose bishops who are favorable to the Nicene Catholic point of view.
What year are we in now? 340?
We're after 337 and we're getting into the 340 range. Athanasius and Marcellus had been deposed and fled into exile in the west. They and their friends went to the Bishop of Rome, Pope St. Julius, and said, you know, really, we were unfairly deposed. You should do something about this. Pope St. Julius wrote a letter, and we still have that letter. He wrote a letter to the Eastern bishops in 340. And what he said in the letter was basically, you had, by deposing the Bishop of Alexandria and Bishop of Ancyra without talking to me first, the Bishop of Rome, who is the primate of all of this, you have violated the custom of the church, going way back. And he said, he wrote in the letter, are you ignorant that the custom has been for word to be written first to us, the Bishop of Rome, and then for a just sentence to be passed from this place, that is Rome? If then any such suspicion rested upon the bishop there, Athanasius, notice thereof ought to have been sent to the church of this place, Rome. What we have received from the blessed Apostle Peter, that I signify to you. And what he's talking about, and he talks about in the letter, he talks about, remember back in the 200s, maybe 60, 70 years before, there had been a dissension in the Alexandrian Church. People said the Bishop of Alexandria should be deposed, and the whole matter was submitted to the Bishop of Rome to be adjudicated. Dionysius of Rome, we talked about that in an early class, wrote letters correcting Dionysius of Alexandria and also reaffirming his status as Bishop of Alexandria. Before that, we had the examples of that we talked about in earlier classes of Clement of Rome, of Anicetus of Rome, Victor of Rome, Dionysius of Rome. And what he's talking about is customary to appeal to the chief, the head of the College of Apostles, of the successor of Peter in Rome, to do this. And so this is a very early document that once again lines up with the traditional teaching about the position of the Bishop of Rome. This letter did not go over well with the emperor, because the emperor thought God had made him the head of everything. And here this is bishop, interfering. In any event, Pope St. Julius suggested that there should be a council to solve all these problems, and the emperor called a council to meet at Sardica, which is is in Bulgaria, Sofia in Bulgaria nowadays. And at that council, there were 90 Western bishops appeared, and 80 Eastern bishops, and Athanasius and Marcellus. And one of the issues was, should they be recognized as the bishops of their sees? Had they been unfairly deposed? Well, the Eastern bishops, under the influence of Constantius, did not like this, said, we're not going to meet if these two are here. And the Western bishops, led by Hosius of Cordova, who had presided at Nicaea. Hosius is getting up there in age, but he says, no, they're going to be here and they're going to participate. Well, the Eastern bishops said, well, we're going to go home. We're going to leave. And what they did is they left and went to right over the border to a place in Constantius's territory called Philoppolis. Sardica was on the eastern edge of Constance portion. And so the Eastern bishops went over here to Philoppolis, and they they excommunicated all the Western bishops, including the Pope, and said they were heretics, and excommunicated Pope St. Julius in Philoppolis. Sardica, the Western bishops continued to meet, and they passed a number of famous canons. Chief among them is a canon that says where a bishop is accused of something or about to be deposed, he has a right to appeal to the Bishop of Rome. And so the Bishop of Rome adjudicates all of those issues. And Sardica has been viewed in the Western Church as valid to this very day. For many centuries, the Council of Sardica is viewed as stating the actual something that is true and still applicable in its canons. Well, in any event, we still have the East, which is in uproar, and there are more councils are held. Milan is an Arian council, and on the handout, I don't have it up here, in 350, the Western Emperor Constans died. He was actually murdered by his troops, which is a normal occupational hazard if you get to be emperor, as we know. Constans was murdered, and an army general named Magnentius said he was emperor of the West. Well, Constantius couldn't stand that. He sent armies, and Magnentius got his head chopped off too. And so Constantius was the sole emperor of the entire world. And this person who's an Arian is now in charge of everything, including Italy and Rome and all of those places. We have more Arian councils, and you can read about these in great detail. They all pass various creeds that are more or less reject Nicaea and to greater or lesser extents are Arian in character. Constantius keeps calling these. They keep condemning Athanasius. A new bishop is elected, Hilary of Poitiers in the west, in France and Gaul. And he stands up for Athanasius and says the Nicene faith is true. Well, he's immediately exiled. And he becomes one of the people writing in Latin who supports Nicaea. Almost all of this is going on in the Greek world. Athanasius, of course, is writing in Greek. But Hilary is an important father for the West. Before that happens, though, we have the Council of Milan. Let me talk about Arles. Arles in southern France. Constantius happened to be there. He called a council. Lots of bishops attend. They all unanimously condemn Athanasius, and the papal legates are forced to sign the condemnation too. So the representatives of the Pope of Rome signed the condemnation. And then in Milan, in the northern Italy, Constantius II calls another council. He's present. And lots of bishops, lots of Western bishops are there. They all unanimously condemn Athanasius and condemn the use of the homoousios. And all but three, everybody but three, every single bishop agrees with that except three. There's a man named Lucifer of Cagliari. It's very interesting. One of the really strong Catholics was named Lucifer. And he's a very hardliner, and he causes a lot of trouble because he interferes with making peace later on. Lucifer of Cagliari, Eusebius of Vercelli, and Dionysius of Milan. The Bishop of Milan is deposed and exiled. And Constantius puts in his place a man named Auxentius, becomes Bishop of Milan, and he stays in Milan as Bishop of Milan to 373. He's an Arian bishop. And a very important event we're going to talk about later happens in 373 in Milan. When Auxentius dies, Ambrose, great Saint Ambrose, gets elected to his place and immediately starts causing trouble because all the clergy are, Arian. And Ambrose is not going to put up with this. We'll talk about Ambrose later, but it has its start here when an Arian bishop is deposed in Milan. Athanasius, meanwhile, there is a brief time where Athanasius is recalled. He's allowed to come back, but then immediately the emperor goes after him again. Let me read again from Davis about this in 356. Davis says, with the church in both east and west cowed into submission, Constantius attacked Athanasius. The Duke Syrianus was ordered to assemble the legions of Egypt and Syria and remove the bishop from Alexandria. On the night of February 8, 356, imperial troops broke into the church where Athanasius, surrounded by his clergy and consecrated virgins, was conducting a vigil service. As the arrows flew and the dead and wounded fell, his clergy hurried the reluctant bishop from his throne, and Athanasius dropped completely from sight. In the next year, George of Cappadocia ceremoniously entered the sullen city to be enthroned as a new bishop, sent there by Constantius, the emperor. George soon unleashed a reign of terror against Athanasius' supporters, while on the side organizing profitable monopolies in pork, salt, papyrus, and funeral arrangements. In the desert, moving from one hiding place to another, welcomed by the monks, never once betrayed by his people, Athanasius remained the religious leader of Egypt, pouring out a steady flood of well-informed books and pamphlets defending the Nicene faith. From the security of the desert, he wrote about Constantius, quote, who that beheld him as chorus leader of his pretended bishops and presiding in ecclesiastical causes, who would not justly exclaim that this was the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. But now, in very truth, it was Athanasius against the world. He's about as the only holdout now against the Arian onslaught, and it gets worse. What happens is Pope St. Julius dies, and Pope Liberius gets, a man named Liberius gets elected Pope in 352, and Liberius immediately is pressured by, the Bishop of Rome is pressured by Constantius to condemn Athanasius. And there's a pagan Roman historian named Ammianus Marcellinus. He was a soldier and he wrote a 3-volume history of Rome at this time from a pagan point of view. And he's very interesting because he has no stake in this. He's not Arian, he's not Catholic. But he talks about these things. There are a couple of very famous passages. One has to do with Liberius. Let me read to you about what he says about Liberius, who gets elected Pope. During the administration of the prefect of Rome, named Leontius, during his administration, a priest of the Christian religion, Liberius by name, by order of Constantius, was brought before the Privy Council on the charge of opposing the emperor's commands and decrees of the majority of his colleagues in an affair which I shall run over briefly. Athanasius, at that time Bishop of Alexandria, was a man who exalted himself above his calling and tried to pry into matters outside his province, as persistent rumors revealed. Therefore, an assembly which had been convoked of members of the same sect, the Christians, a synod as they called it, deposed him from the rank that he held. For it was reported that, being highly skilled in the interpretation of prophetic lots or of the omens indicated by birds, he had sometimes foretold future events. And besides this, he was also charged with other practices repugnant to the purposes of religion over which he presided, cutting off bishops' hands. Liberius, Bishop of Rome, when directed by the emperor's order to depose Athanasius from his priesthood by endorsing the official decree, though holding the same opinion as the rest, he strenuously objected, crying out there was the height of injustice to condemn a man unseen and unheard, thus, of course, openly defying the emperor's will. For although Constantius, who was always hostile to Athanasius, knew that the matter had been carried out, yet Constantius strove with eager desire to have it ratified, also by the higher power of the bishop of the eternal city. And since he could not obtain this, Liberius was spirited away, but only with the greatest difficulty and in the middle of the night, for fear of the populace who were devotedly attached to him. Constantius had Liberius kidnapped and taken from Rome. This is a pagan historian who says Constantius the emperor knew that it was desirable to have this decision against Athanasius ratified by the higher power of the bishop of the eternal city. It's another indication of the position held by the Bishop of Rome in the early church. Okay, it gets worse. Liberius is kidnapped, and then ultimately he's forced to condemn Athanasius, and he's forced to sign one of the Arian creeds. And he's in exile for years. And while he's in exile, an anti-pope, Constantius has a new bishop of Rome elected, a man named Felix, and he's an anti-pope. And the populace of Rome refuses to accept him. Felix tries to do services in the churches of Rome, they run him out. He has to move to the suburbs because it's too hot. Rome is too hot for him. Because the populace of Rome is loyal to Liberius and loyal to the Catholic faith. So you have two popes, one's in exile, Liberius, the other anti-pope is in Rome. And things continue to fall apart. We continue to have more councils. In 357, there's another council held at Sirmium, and it's Anomian. That is, it is hardline Arian, and all the bishops of synods unanimously proclaim that the Son is not like the Father. They don't have the same subject. They're not like at all. This Hilary of Poitiers termed this synod the blasphemy of Sirmium. But it gets worse, because we have councils in Ancyra and Rimini, Seleucia, and Constantinople. And what happens here is, particularly in Rimini, Seleucia, Constantius says, we're going to have a gigantic council to resolve this. And we're going to have it, the Western bishops are going to meet at Rimini, and 400 of them attend. The Eastern bishops are going to meet at Seleucia, and 150 attend. So you've got 550 bishops, and they unanimously vote in favor of the Arian creed. They do their Homoian creed, which says that the Father and Son are like each other, but they are not of the same substance. Constantius has them early next year all come to Constantinople, and they reaffirm. 550 bishops reaffirm that the Creed of Nicaea is no good anymore. Homoousius consubstantiality is not the truth, and we have a Homoian Arian creed adopted. Jerome is in Jerusalem. He writes his famous statement, "The whole world groaned and found itself Arian." The entire world now is Arian. The Pope has condemned Athanasius. It's Athanasius Contra Mundum, and there are only 2 or 3 bishops in the entire world who are, and they're all fleeing in hiding. And it looks like the entire Catholic Church has been defeated. Then something remarkable happens. And what happens is Constantius II dies in 361, and he appoints as his heir Julian, who he thinks is going to continue the Arian program. Well, Julian had been one of the survivors of the bloodbath back when Constantine's family was murdered by the army. And Julian didn't think much of any of the Christians, and he decided to be a pagan and to bring back the pagan religion. And he grew a beard, so he looked like a philosopher, and he brought back paganism, and he stopped helping the Arians, and he stopped helping the Catholics and let them do whatever they wanted to. As a result, Athanasius was able to return. He's known to history as Julian the Apostate, because he was a family of Constantine who went back to paganism. He only lived for a couple of years. He died of his wounds. He was fighting the Persians. And he died, and a man named Jovian succeeded him, but he only ruled for a very short period of time. Athanasius returned from exile, but then he got exiled twice more. Once Jovian died, the empire, you got 2 more emperors, one in the west, Valentinian, and in the east, a man named Valens, who's very important. Valens is going to rule for the next 13 years, and he is even more hardcore Arian than Constantius. So the fight starts again. Let me read a little bit about that from Davis. By 369, Valens was at liberty to attend church affairs. His first act was to support the election of the unworthy Thracian Demophilus, former jailer of Pope Liberius, to the see of Constantinople. When 80 ecclesiastics, 80 priests, protested to Valens against this election, he had them abandoned aboard a boarding ship. He got the prefect, he said, well, you going into exile? Prefects put them on a wooden ship, and they let it out, and the crew fled and set it on fire. They killed 80 priests, burned them up.
Didn't play around, huh?
No, you do not trifle with the emperor. Persecution of his opposition then widened. Clerics were presented with the creed of Rimini, Seleucia, and Constantinople. Those who failed to adhere to it were threatened with financial exactions, prison, exile, even death. All over the East, the life of the church was disrupted by the deposition and exile of recalcitrant clergy. To crown the troubles, in 373, Athanasius died after 45 stormy years as Bishop of Alexandria. The Nicenes immediately elected his brother, Peter, in his place, so Peter becomes Bishop of Alexandria, brother of Athanasius. But the government refused to ratify the election. Instead, an Arian, Lucius, was ordered installed by force. By the way, when they put George in place of Athanasius before, and George was ultimately murdered by riots in Alexandria because the people did not like George. Athanasius was actually in hiding, so he went away. But Athanasius dies, and Peter, his brother, is elected, but then, yet again, the government installs another bishop, Lucius. The major church of Alexandria was invaded by the police and a mob from the gutters. Terrible scenes followed. A young man dressed as a woman danced obscenely on the altar. Another, naked, sat in Athanasius' episcopal throne, preaching filthy homilies. Finally, the imperially appointed Lucius was enthroned in the desecrated church, attended by the aged Eusebius of Antioch, one of a man who was one of Arius' original disciples 50 years before. now wreaking vengeance on the dead Athanasius. Amid the reign of terror which now fell on the Nicenes of Egypt, with 12 bishops and over 100 priests and monks in exile, Peter fled to the protection of the Bishop of Rome, as his brother had done 30 years before. Leadership of the Orthodox East now passed from the dead Athanasius to the new metropolitan of Cappadocia, Basil the Great. In Basil, Athanasius found a worthy successor. We're going to talk about Basil at length. I'll read you a little bit right here. When an imperial commissioner threatened him with confiscation of his property or exile if he refused to conform to the decrees of these Arian councils, he responded with such vigor that the commissioner remarked indignantly, "No one has ever spoken to me in such a manner and with such liberty of speech." Basil answered, "Perhaps you have never met a bishop before." Suffering cruelly from indigestion brought on by the austerity of his life, Basil welcomed torture, he said, as a possible cure for his liver. Bring it on, is what Basil said. And we're going to hear about Basil next week. But it gets, in a way, worse, or maybe better, depending upon our point of view. Liberius dies, and there's a papal election in Rome, and the man who gets elected is Pope Damasus. But there is a turmoil in the papal election. This is in, I think in 365, I believe, 366. Let's see here. Yes, 366, Damasus gets elected Bishop of Rome, but the election is contested. A man named Ursinus also is put forward as a candidate for the Bishop of Rome. And here's what Ammianus Marcellinus, the pagan historian, writes about the election, the papal election of 366. As his successor came as Praetorian prefect of Rome, Viventius, a former court chancellor, he's a government officer in Rome, a just and prudent man of Pannonia, whose administration was quiet and mild and rich in abundance of everything, but he, the prefect too, was alarmed by sanguinary outbreaks of the factions of the people, which were caused by the following affair. Damasus and Ursinus, burning with a superhuman desire of seizing the bishopric, engaged in bitter strife because of their opposing interests, and the supporters of both parties went even so far as conflicts ending in bloodshed and death. Since the prefect was able neither to end nor to diminish this strife, he was compelled to yield to its great violence and retire to the suburbs. The police had to leave Rome, the violence was so bad. And in the struggle, Damasus was victorious through the efforts of the party which favored him. It is a well-known fact that in the Basilica of Sicinius, this basilica is also known as the Liberian Basilica. Today it's known as St. Mary Major. That's where they had elections. Where the assembly of the Christian sect is held, in a single day, 137 corpses of the slain were found, and it was only with difficulty that the long-continued frenzy of the people was afterward quieted. So you have a papal conclave, and they bring 137 corpses out of the basilica. Now, you think church in crisis now, that's church in crisis. There's nothing like this that we endure today. It's just astonishing what the church is going through. Ammianus writes later, Ammianus Marcellinus, the historian, he says about Christians, he says, "No wild beasts are so hostile to humans as the majority of Christians are to one another."
Love one another.
Yeah. So you have this enormous fight, and people, historians, skeptical, unbeliever historians like Edward Gibbon point to this and say, look, this just shows that the Christian religion is no good. They kill each other. They engage in these terrible acts, and that's just what they do. By saying that, they do not realize a couple of things. One of the things is what's at stake. It's the Catholic faith, the dogma, the mystery of the Incarnation, who Jesus Christ is. The Catholic traditional faith was that Jesus Christ is God. And here we have the government attempting to impose by force a new teaching that Jesus Christ is not really God. He's God only in a symbolic sense or a metaphorical sense. And that therefore the government wants to impose this new belief on the people by force. And they connive with the bishops who are politically inclined, who want to get favors from the government and try to impose this. Just a second, I'll get to you. one of the amazing things that this history teaches us is the following. It is very fashionable today. You will read in newspaper accounts, religious opinion writers, academics, so-called sophisticated, well-educated people will assert something like the following: that the original religion of Christ, Jesus was a great teacher, a nice person, he did good things, but of course he wasn't God. The miracle stories are made up because of course we know miracles can't happen. And the notion that he died and rose from the dead, that can't happen either. People don't rise from the dead. So he rose only metaphorically or spiritually or kind of in some sort of, metaphorical sense. And that was a pure religion. And it looked very much like leftist progressive thought today. Jesus would, he would, if we only knew, he would be supporting all of the leftist progressive stuff that the sophisticated people today espouse. And what happened is the Catholic Church came in and perverted this pure religion. And what they did, in particular, through these councils, is they got in league with the Christian emperors and the Christian state, and in order to amass wealth and power, the bishops aligned with the Christian emperors to impose a new faith. And they made up a new faith, and they said, asserted for the first time, Jesus Christ is God. And they used that to beat the people into submission and to control them for the next 1,000 years. And that's what happened, and it's a shame, because if we could only get back to the pure religion of Jesus the teacher, Jesus the prophet, we'd all be much better off. And all this bloodshed just shows that. I read an excerpt from Chesterton last week, and he says if you understand the real history, it's got it exactly upside down and backwards. It is true that the Christian emperors tried to impose a new religion on the Catholic faithful. And it is true that a lot of bishops who were hungry for power and wealth and advancement went over and joined the emperor in those efforts. But the religion that they were seeking to impose was Arianism. And what they were seeking to say is Jesus Christ is not God. That's the new thing. And so what you hear and read in the newspaper today about this history is exactly the opposite. The Catholic Church protected the traditional teaching and protected it against all odds when the entire world was against it. All the powerful people in the world were trying to impose a new religion, and you had Athanasius almost alone against the entire world saying, no, that's not true. We'll also see, and I'll get to this next week, I'm going to talk about the Catholic restoration, how we turn all this around. And I'll tell you about Blessed John Henry Newman's book on Arians of the 4th century. He wrote a book called Arians of the 4th century when he was an Anglican in 1833, and he examined this, and what he discovered was that even though the imperial court, the bishops, the army were all in favor of Arianism, the Catholic faithful, the people, were violently against it. The faith was defended and protected by a few people like Athanasius and the great mass of the Catholic faithful. And he gives example after example from history. And we'll talk about that next week when we talk about how the church, the Catholic Church, revived from this terrific assault and actually came back stronger, and Arianism was ultimately defeated. And it's really a providential, miraculous story. As I said before, one of the major themes of this is that the church, crisis is normal, especially after a council, and we see this in no better example is in the Arian conflict.
All the time you hear people trying to shut you down by saying, do you know how many people have died because of using the name of Christ? And,
right. And this is one of the things they point to. And they were killed by emperors trying to destroy the Catholic Church, is one of the things you can say. A lot of them. Another thing you can say is it is a Catholic dogma that everybody's sinful, including the people in the church. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. It is a Catholic dogma that people are going to do bad things. And they're going to do, and that includes churchmen. That's why we all have confessors. The Pope has a confessor.
I always say with power, it's going to come corruption.
If someone says, the church members have done terrible things, prelates have done terrible things, you say, of course. That's what our religion says. That's an article of faith. They're gonna do that, and that's why our God came, to get us out of that mess. So, that's this. Next week will be more strife, but the Catholics will start winning next week for a change.
Well, yeah, it's getting depressing.
Yes. Yes.
I am not educated on it at all, but is that like the beginning of the split of the East and the West coming up? Is that
No,
whether or not?
actually, not really. This is the beginning of the tying together of the East and West. This is going to culminate in 451, the Council of Chalcedon, where all the Eastern bishops say, Leo, the Bishop of Rome, Peter has spoken through Leo. We adopt this faith. It goes downhill after that.
Okay.
We're coming to crescendos in the Fourth Council. We'll talk about that too. Let's close with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death.